Hello, Tara here. It's been a roller coaster of a week, and it is time for some me time. So here we are with Chapter 9 of The Bridge to Belle Island. Let's see if getting closer helps with the sound a little bit. Isabel slipped down to the dining room with a sigh of pleasure. How lovely to see the long table laid with all the fine family china and silver they so rarely used these days. Their cook-housekeeper, Mrs. Philpotts, fairly glowed with exertion and enjoyment. How she had bustled about, setting the table, inspecting the glasses for spots, and selecting only the straightest wax candles for the candelabra and chandelier. She had arranged flowers from their garden and fruit from the greengrocer in lovely displays, now and again dashing back to the kitchen to look at this roast or that fowl, or observe the progress of the side dishes or sauces. Isabel and Lottie had offered to help, but Mrs. Philpotts wanted to see to everything herself. It was such a treat for her to prepare a formal meal after so many simple breakfasts, plain midday repasts, and boxed dinners for the workers. At Isabel's prodding, she had engaged 2 additional girls from the village to help with all the chopping and cleaning, and a waiter from the inn to act as second footman and help Jacob serve. Together, Isabel and Mrs. Philpotts had planned a lovely menu. A first course of asparagus soup and turbot fish, with lobster sauce, followed by roast sirloin of beef, leg of lamb, larded guinea fowls, peas and stewed mushrooms, and finally a dessert course of meringues, orange jelly, and raspberry rhubarb ices. Isabel surveyed the room one last time, touching up the flower arrangement and straightening the silverware. Finally, she switched 2 place cards, then on second thought switched them back. Did she want Mr. Booker seated next to her, or directly across from her, watching her every expression? A difficult decision. She might have stood there vacillating longer, but Carlotta appeared and gently turned her toward the door. "The table looks lovely. Time to worry about your own appearance. Your bath is ready." Isabel allowed her friend to lead her upstairs. Lottie helped her undress and took her hand to steady her as she stepped into the tub. As Isabel sank into the warm water, her muscles relaxed and her worries faded away. She had been foolish to allow a dream to bother her so much. Her anxiety over Rose's engagement and Percival's death had clearly left her overly emotional. Of course, she had not somehow sneaked away to London and seen Percival dead. Foolish, irrational creature. After Isabel had soaked for a time, Lottie helped her wash her hair. Heavenly. She leaned forward, bowing her head as Carlotta poured warm rinse water over her hair. Carlotta paused. "Mees, how did you get that bruise on your back?" "A nasty bruise, near your tailbone." Isabel stiffened, her pleasure evaporating. The dream came back to her, falling on the stairs, hitting her tailbone on the bottom step, her elbow on the newel post. She rose abruptly in the tub, and Carlotta hurried to retrieve a towel and help her out. Isabel stepped to the long mirror and twisted to the side. Sure enough, a purple bruise marred her lower back. "I don't remember doing anything to cause this, and that scares me." "Perhaps you knocked against something the other night, coming in from the boathouse in the dark." "I suppose so." But a chill shivered over her, dispelling the warm comfort of the bath. What else might she not remember doing? I will bet money that the dream was not a dream. Lottie helped her into an evening gown of duck-egg blue taffeta with a gold satin trim. Isabel hoped the style and color were not too young for her. The more typical ivory worn by many women gave her complexion an unflattering sallow tinge. Next, Isabel sat at the dressing table while Lottie curled her hair. Normally Isabel scoffed at too much fuss, but now she pushed aside her worries and said, "Why not? It is a festive occasion after all." Lottie pressed her advantage. "And a touch of rouge?" "Very well." At the appointed hour, Isabel made her way downstairs. For a moment she remained on the bottom step, watching the scene in the entry hall as guests began arriving. At the door, Jacob took hats, greatcoats, and capes. He looked like a stranger, dressed as he was in foreign-looking livery. The guests of honor stood waiting to meet the new arrivals. Mr. Adair in elegant evening attire, and Rose resplendent in shimmering ivory satin with an embroidered bodice. Her hair had been curled in tiny ringlets by Miss O'Toole, a woman of many talents, who had kept her place with Rose all these years by learning new skills as the need arose. Dr. Grant arrived, wearing customary black and white. She realized anew that the stark colors were not flattering to Teddy, with his pale complexion and auburn hair, nor was the cut of his coat as impressive as Mr. Adair's. She supposed the country physician had few occasions to dress formally. The squeak of shoe leather caught her ear, and she turned with a little gasp. "Oh, Mr. Booker, you startled me." The lawyer, striking in evening attire, came down the stairs looking a bit self-conscious. "Will I do?" Her gaze traveled over him, heartbeat quickening. The coat emphasized broad shoulders and narrow waist. Every romance protagonist has broad shoulders and a narrow waist. The high white shirt collar accentuated his strong jawline and cheekbones. "My goodness," she breathed. "My father never looked half so good in those as you do." She stopped herself. That is, you look quite tolerable." "Thank you. If true, the credit goes to Adair's valet, who insisted on helping me dress and do something with my hair. Did you ask him to do so?" "No, I'm afraid I did not think of it." "He pressed the trousers, pinned up the waistcoat to better fit me, and polished the shoes. He also gave me the best shave of my life and tried to tame my hair. I hope I don't look the poodle or the fop." Dark hair curled over his brow, and his side whiskers had been trimmed to a fashionable point. She shook her head. "Neither one, I assure you." His gaze moved from her hair to her face, to her dress, and back again. "And you, Miss Wilder, you look quite tolerable, too." But the light in his eyes told her he found her pretty. Her cheeks grew warm. "Thank you, but you needn't flatter me. I know I am a woman of a certain age." He continued down the stairs until he stood on the same step. "A certain age? You mentioned you are only 30, and as I am a similar age, I call that young indeed." She smiled. "I admire your logic. Well, we had better go in. I'm meant to be the hostess after all, and I am late to my own party." As Isabel descended the last step onto the marble floor, her shoes slipped on the highly polished surface. Instinctively she flailed for a handhold and ended up gripping Mr. Booker's arm. "Sorry, these new slippers are just that, slippery." He laid a firm hand over hers. "All right?" She nodded, but somehow she felt more at risk of falling than before. He teased. "I would offer you my arm, but you have it in a death grip already." "Oh, forgive me." She released him, but he grinned and jutted his elbow toward her. At this parry of humor from the serious solicitor, amusement overcame her embarrassment. She took his arm, a girlish giggle escaping as they gingerly crossed the hall together. A stern-looking Theodore Grant appeared in their path. "You needn't scowl so, Teddy," Isabel said. "I slept on the marble, and Mr. Booker was kind enough to, offer his arm." The physician's brow furrowed with concern. "Are you all right?" Yes, yes, perfectly. I did not fall, thanks to Mr. Booker. Now, is everyone here?" Isabel moved on to greet her guests, Mr. and Mrs. Trulock and their daughter Arminda, her mother's old friend, Lady Elliot, Rose's childhood friends, the Miss Farringdons, and their brother George. and of course Dr. Grant, Mr. Booker, Rose, and Christopher Adair. The 12 of them took their seats around the beautifully set table lit by many candles, their flames spangling the silver tureen and serving dishes. After the soup course, the meal was served in traditional French family style, with dishes arranged on the table and everyone helping themselves and their neighbors to whatever they wished to eat. Noticing Isabel eyeing the roast, Mr. Booker reached for the serving fork, but Teddy circumvented him, saying a bit too loudly, "What can I serve for you, Isabel? Some roast and the horseradish sauce? I know you are partial to it." He put a slice of meat on her plate and spooned the sauce on for her. "Thank you, Teddy. I could have managed the sauce on my own." "I don't mind. I like helping you." Aware of Mr. Booker watching with studious interest, Isabel was embarrassed by Teddy's doting behavior. She turned her attention to Rose and instantly felt better. How pretty and happy she looked, talking with the Trulocks and Farringdons, and smiling often at Mr. Adair. After the final course, Isabel took a deep breath and rose. Tapping her glass with a spoon, she soon claimed everyone's attention. Self-conscious with so many pairs of eyes upon her, Isabel felt her smile waver, but the faces were all friendly, familiar ones. Even Mr. Booker appeared less suspicious than when he'd first arrived. Emboldened, she began. "I realize it is more traditional for the man of the family to toast the health of the young couple we are here to celebrate tonight, but I hope you don't mind listening to me instead." Arminda smiled encouragement, and Isabel continued. "The last time we celebrated an engagement in this family was when my sister Grace became engaged to her dear Harry Lawrence. It was my father standing up, raising his glass. How long ago it seems. How I miss them all still." Her throat tightened and she swallowed the rising lump. Grace and Harry were very much in love and eager to serve God and country, even though it meant going far from home. Seeing Rose tonight, none of us can doubt how much in love she is with her dear Christopher as well. She met Rose's gaze and continued, hoping to get through her speech without crying. "I know from my sister's letters how much she and Mr. Lawrence loved you, Rose, how they prayed for you and hoped you would have a good, long, meaningful life. They would be so happy for you, were they here, so proud of the wonderful young woman you've become." Isabel's voice hitched, and she pressed her lips together to halt their tremble. Across the table, Rose's brown eyes glistened with tears. Isabel forced a smile. "I hope, Mr. Adair, that you will endeavor to deserve her, for she has the most beautiful, loving heart I have ever known." "I could not agree more," Adair said, then added with a roguish wink, "and the most beautiful everything else." He put his arm around Rose's shoulder and she playfully pushed him away. Isabel continued, "I congratulate you, Mr. Adair, and my dear Rose, I wish you every happiness in the world." She raised her glass higher. "To Christopher and Rose." "To Christopher and Rose," the others echoed. Around the table, guests lifted their glasses and nodded their heads to the couple in acknowledgment. Shortly thereafter, Isabel stood again, this time signaling it was time for the women to withdraw. "Well, ladies, shall we leave the men to their port and vile cigars?" Mr. Trulock teased. "What? Are we to have none of your famous orange wine tonight?" "Not this time." She darted an awkward glance at Mr. Booker. "There is some concern that the latest batch might be a little strong." "Don't tarry too long," Rose urged the men, "for we are to have music soon. Aunt Belle thought we ought to limit the party to dinner only, for propriety's sake after recent news. But I insisted. So if you must blame anyone, blame me. But for now, rest up, for dancing begins soon." Rose had asked Carlotta to play the pianoforte in the drawing room while the women sipped tea and their food settled. When the men joined them half an hour later, Isabel rose and said, "Many of you have met Miss Medina, my companion and friend, but you may not know that she is also an accomplished actress and singer, and though she is reluctant, she has agreed to sing for us. Please offer her your encouragement." Around the room, polite applause rose. Carlotta began to play and sing De Viene non tardar from The Marriage of Figaro by Mozart and Lorenzo da Ponte. As Carlotta sang the love song in her pure, lush soprano voice, Mr. Booker leaned near. "What in the world is she doing here as your maid? She belongs on the stage." "That is where I first saw her," Isabel whispered back.
"Why did she give it up?"
"You shall have to ask her. Though I will say her choice of song is rather ironic. In the opera it is sung by the Countess's maid while pretending to be a lady." His lips pursed in appreciation.
"I don't understand Italian. What do the words mean?"
"I am a poor translator, but something like, 'At last the moment arrives. I will experience joy without worry in the arms of my beloved. Fearful anxieties, get out of my heart.'" For a moment Isabel stilled, silently echoing the words. Fearful anxieties, get out of my heart. Would she ever experience joy without worry? She felt Mr. Booker's thoughtful gaze on her profile. She sent him a small smile and then returned her focus to the music. Carlotta sang a second piece, and after a hearty round of applause, she rose and curtsied. "Now enough of singing. The bride-to-be wishes to dance." "Hear, hear!" Rose enthused, rising to her feet and taking Christopher's hand. The furniture at the end of the long room had already been placed around the perimeter in preparation, and the large Turkish carpet had been rolled up and taken away. Rose called the first dance, the Leamington, and she and Mr. Adair stood at the top of the set as lead couple. Other couples filled in, forming two facing lines for a long ways dance. Teddy claimed Isabel, and Mr. and Mrs. Truelock joined them. George Farrington politely asked Lady Elliot, but she waved away his offer, protesting she was too old to dance, so he turned and asked one of his sisters instead. His other sister, a budding musician herself, stood beside Carlotta at the pianoforte to watch her flying fingers and turn the pages of music. That left Mr. Booker and Arminda Truelock standing alone. Mr. Booker, looking ill at ease, turned to her.
"I am afraid I am out of practice."
Arminda smiled bravely. "That is all right. I don't mind sitting out if you'd rather not dance."
"I am willing if you are," he said. "I am simply warning you to beware your feet."
Arminda's face pinkened with pleasure. "Oh, then yes, I would love to. Thank you." Seeing her friend's happiness, Isabel's regard for Mr. Booker instantly grew. She watched him covertly as they danced. He moved with natural, athletic ease, and while he made a wrong turn now and again, he recovered quickly and soon mastered the patterns. They completed a set of country dances, then paused to change partners. Mr. and Mrs. Truelock begged off to rest, joining Lady Elliot in comfortable chairs around the perimeter. Isabel secretly hoped to dance with Mr. Booker, but Mr. Adair politely asked for the next, and Teddy dutifully danced the second with Rose. George and Miss Truelock paired up, leaving Mr. Booker to dance with one of the young Miss Farringdons. Carlotta launched into a lively cotillion, and the four remaining couples danced another set. When the dance ended, they were all overheated by their exertions. Rose threw open the garden door to let in some cool air. Mrs. Philpotts brought in punch and lemonade, and everyone paused to take refreshment, talking and laughing and catching their breath. Lady Elliot took Isabel aside and said, "I gather that handsome Mr. Booker is your lawyer. I had hoped he was a new admirer."
"I am afraid not."
"Pity. Of course I would prefer a gentleman for you, but at your age, my dear, it does not do to be too exacting." "I quite agree." Lady Elliot sent her a mischievous grin and pressed her arm. As she walked away, Dr. Grant approached and placed a shawl around Isabel's shoulder.
"Don't want you to take a chill."
"Oh, I am not... well, thank you." She smiled at the thoughtful gesture and stepped to the sideboard to refill her lemonade. Mr. Booker stood nearby, glass in hand. He nodded toward the physician.
"He is something of a mother hen, is he not?"
Isabel glanced over at Teddy. I suppose he is. He has been looking after me for a long time. She turned back to Mr. Booker, found his warm eyes fastened upon her, and wondered what it would be like to be cared for by such a man. She was fond of Teddy and would probably even have agreed to marry him if he'd asked, assuming his father remained elsewhere. But she could not honestly say she was in love with him. She had fancied herself in love only once, and that had been years ago. She thought again of the man who had rescued Ollie. For a moment she'd imagined it was him. Would Evan Curtis one day return to Belle Island? Did she want him to? Isabel was not certain. Stepping closer, Mr. Booker asked, May I have the next, Miss Wilder? Your friends survived dancing with me, although I cannot guarantee your toes will. Isabel's stomach tingled with anticipation. With pleasure. I consider myself and my toes duly warned. Carlotta played the introduction of another country dance, and Isabel recognized it as Prince William of Gloucester's waltz. The couples took their places. First they faced their corners, balancing right and left, then turned and changed places. Mr. Booker took both of her hands in his, and together they moved around their neighbors. Although she was wearing gloves, the lawyer had discarded his, and Isabel noticed how easily his larger hands enveloped hers. Finally, they joined 4 hands across and circled right, then left. The simple pattern repeated, and each time Mr. Booker faced her or took her hand, his gaze held hers. He really had the most arresting eyes. Moving forward the second time, he stepped on her hem, causing her to stumble. Grasping her hands to steady her, his face reddened. Sorry. She smiled reassurance. That's all right. When the set ended, Mr. Booker offered his arm and escorted her to her seat. You are a beautiful dancer, Miss Wilder. Very graceful, even when some clod steps on your dress. Her cheeks warmed with pleasure. Thank you. He grinned. And how are your toes? She looked up into his deep brown eyes, thinking, in less danger than my heart. When next they rested between sets, the guest begged Carlotta to sing again. She modestly resisted their entreaties, though Isabel, who knew her so well, could see the attention pleased her. She added her own encouragement. Do sing for us. Perhaps something from Don Giovanni? It was after this opera that Isabel had first met Carlotta Medina, though she was using her stage name at the time. She had performed the role of Donna Elvira, a woman abandoned by her lover and seeking revenge. Isabel turned to see what had arrested her attention. Now their eyes met for a meaningful moment, and then with a somber nod, Carlotta began to sing. But then she broke off mid-song, staring at something. Isabel turned to see what had arrested her attention. In the open garden door stood a man in a great coat, walking stick in hand. Isabel gasped, palm instinctively pressed to her heart. Evan Curtis. The man she had once thought she'd marry. She had not spoken to him in nearly 10 years, not since Uncle Percy persuaded her to refuse him. It had been him on the other side of the bridge. He looked somewhat different. Shoulders broader, jaw stronger, more a man than the rash youth she recalled. His hair was still black, his face devilishly handsome, his eyes piercing blue and more sardonic than ever. Mr. Curtis, Isabel faltered. He stepped inside. It's Captain Curtis now. I meant to stay away, but I heard the most singular voice. He turned to Carlotta at the pianoforte. My compliments, madam. Lottie darted an uncertain glance at Isabel, then back to him. Thank you. Isabel struggled to think of what to say, especially with an audience witnessing their awkward reunion, including Mr. Booker. You have been to see your father? I have. He is the reason I've come, after all. I hope you didn't think I'd come to see...
Anyone else?
I... No, I...
That's all in the past, of course. Ah, Miss Truelock.
He bowed to Arminda, and she curtsied but did not smile. Evan turned and added,
And here's the great physician himself.
Teddy walked forward to stand beside Isabel, his mouth pressed into a prim line.
Curtis, about time you showed up. Your father has been worried sick. Good to see you too, Theo. Haven't changed a bit, I see. Except your hair is thinner, as is your wit, I imagine. Ooh.
Teddy stiffened, but Curtis raised a consoling palm.
Forgive me. My father says you have been kindness itself to him all these years, and I sincerely appreciate it.
Dr. Grant held his gaze a moment, perhaps gauging his sincerity, then relaxed.
It has been my pleasure. He is a good man, and he has missed you terribly. Yes, well, I had good reason to stay away.
He sent a telling glance toward Isabel. Evan walked farther into the room, and she noticed a slight limp. He added,
I speak of duty, of course. Duty kept me away, but I am back now.
Dr. Grant frowned.
The war has been over for some time. Has it? I beg to disagree. Some wars are just beginning.
The two men stared at one another until Isabel cleared her throat and said brightly, For those of you who haven't met Captain Curtis, he is Abel Curtis's son. He and Dr. Grant and I have known each other since childhood. Rose stepped forward with a ready grin. I knew you only briefly when I was young, but I remember you. You always had a licorice drop for me in your pocket. She curtsied and he bowed, his eyes remaining on her face. He slowly shook his head in awe.
She is the picture of her mother.
Yes, Isabel acknowledged.
Curtis patted his pocket. I'm afraid I've no candy today.
That's all right, Rose winked. You may remedy that tomorrow. He chuckled. Isabel added, We are celebrating Rose's engagement to Mr. Adair. His surprised glance swept over Isabel, Teddy, and Arminda. How can it be that Grace's wee girl is old enough to marry when we four, so stricken in years, are yet unwed? Isabel laughed softly. That is an interesting question. For a moment Evan's gaze remained on her. Then he turned again toward Lottie. And may I ask the name of your songbird? Of course. This is Carlotta Medina. Miss Medina, Captain Curtis. An old friend. Yes, I have heard him spoken of. One side of Evan's mouth lifted in a lazy grin.
All bad, I trust?
Not at all. Not all.
Sorry.
The two regarded one another a moment. Evan looked away first, bowing again to Rose.
Please excuse me, Miss Rose. I am sure the last thing you want is an uninvited, unwelcome guest at your party.
Uninvited, maybe, she said, but that does not mean you are unwelcome. I was just about to beg for another dance. Will you join us? He made a face, part grimace, part smile.
Thank you, but my dancing days are over, thanks to Bonaparte.
He tapped his walking stick against his ankle.
My last injury did not heal well.
Isabel swallowed. She wanted to speak with him alone, even though the prospect made her nervous. Gathering her courage, she said, You lead another dance without me, Rose. I will just see Captain Curtis out. Around the room, looks were exchanged, and Teddy began to protest, but Arminda grasped his arm, forestalling him. Dear Arminda. Mr. Booker watched it all with a curious expression on his face. Evan followed her out of the room without comment. In the shadowy hall, Isabel began. You joined an infantry regiment, I understand.
Yes, because Percival Norris purchased my commission. Started as an ensign, thanks to him, but advanced thanks to no one but me. Or maybe Boney, who killed one superior officer after another.
Behind them, the notes of a Scottish reel could be heard. Isabel said, That's all right. I do recall hearing that.
You knew he sent me away. Did you also know he made sure I would be assigned to a distant regiment about to be shipped off to war-torn Spain and Portugal? He didn't care where I went as long as it was far from you. You knew, and you said nothing. Did nothing? Again she swallowed. I was glad Uncle Percy did something for you, though I did not know the particulars of the posting. Even so, I felt terrible about how things ended. I knew you were disappointed, so I... And you were not, is that it? You were glad to be rid of me? No, but we were so young, and Percy so adamant. Evan waved a hand, feigning unconcern. That's all right. I should be thankful. It was a great opportunity for a poor lad like me, father only a groundsman to the lofty Wilders. A chance to travel, see the world, and move up in it. And I have done. He sent her a sidelong glance. I was surprised to hear you had not wed. Isabel shook her head. He studied her face, then added dryly, You need not worry. I have no wish to rekindle old feelings. I realize I was just a green, stupid boy, and you the only female on my age on the island. It was only natural I should fancy myself in love with you. It was an illusion, of course. I got over it as quickly as you did, no doubt. Stung by his words, Isabel licked dry lips. What to say? I am relieved you are alive and well. When you did not return after the war, we worried about you. Did you indeed? Yes. He held her gaze a moment, then looked away. Well, I cannot say the same. I only came here tonight because I saw the lights and heard the music. Merely curious. Your Miss Medina is a gem. His voice held a brittle quality. Was he purposefully aiming to hurt her, or was he disguising his own pain? That was you on the road today, was it not? Thank you for saving my pup. He shrugged. It was nothing. Taking a deep breath, he said, Well, I had better get back to my father, though I would stay with him for a few days. Thought I would stay with him for a few days. That is, if the mistress of the island does not mind. Of course not. You are welcome. Am I? How kind. Are you sure Mr. Norris will not jump out of the shadows and send me packing once more? She shook her head. He cannot. He is dead. Evan stilled, sobered. When? She told him what she knew. Dash it. He rubbed a hand over his face and muttered, I was afraid of that. She looked at him in surprise. What do you mean? Never mind. Good night, Isabel Wilder, and goodbye. Again. Everyone seems to know something, but they are not giving it up. Evan.